great honor to be here. I was not familiar with this ministry, but obviously it is a good representative of our community. And so I do know some familiar faces around, and so it's so good to be here. A little bit about myself. I found Jesus when I was 17 years old. I grew up in Indiana, and my father passed away in April of the year that I was 17 years old. And because of some relationship issues that we had, I was carrying the burden of his death. And unfortunately, my mom was not able to help through that grief process, and kind of put some of that burden actually on me, that I was kind of responsible for him passing, which I wasn't. But at the time, when you're 17 years old, you know, there had been a break in the relationship, and that never got reconciled. But he passed away suddenly, and I had some friends that led me to Christ, and so I made that commitment to him. I grew up in church without my parents, but I had never accepted Christ into my life. I then went on to Anderson College and Anderson University, and ended up having a good friend from high school that went there. And she moved, when we graduated from college, she moved to Wichita. That was the daycare center director for one of the churches, for Westside Church of God. And at that season in Indiana, the auto industry and stuff was not doing well, and so it was really hard to find employment. And she kept sending me job listings for Wichita that were bigger than the entire newspaper for our local town there in Anderson. So I said, okay. So she says, why don't you come on out here? So I came in 1978, planned on staying a year, and not knowing at the time that this is where God was going to plant me for the rest of my life. I've tried to leave many times. I even moved away under the disobedience of the Lord, and thinking I was done here, and he suddenly plucked me out of where I was living and brought me back here. So I have finally come to the decision that this is where I am supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. So he told me that I was a missionary. I wanted to be a missionary my whole life. And he told me that Wichita and this community is my mission field. And so I've had the wonderful opportunity of doing many different things. I was on staff at Central Community for a while. Left there and helped to be a part of starting New Life Covenant Church with Pastor Kit Tabor, and have then kind of moved around again, just doing so many variety of things that I've been blessed to be able to do. And I thought I was semi-retiring, and I technically am, but in March, this position came open. And I had said, I worked for Catholic Charities for about 3.5 years. I did housing for folks coming out of domestic violence, and that grant had come to an end, so I was just doing very part-time work for Catholic Charities as a volunteer coordinator. And I knew that back in January and February that my time was coming to a close, and I thought, yippee, I get to retire full-time. Well, that wasn't it. So anyway, I had made a comment to someone about that, and Carol actually got wind of that and called me when the position for Love in Action opened up. And without even thinking, I said, yes, I will go ahead and apply. And I'm thinking, what have I just done? Because I wanted to just spend time at home. I was getting to do a lot of one-on-one ministry with people, getting to just spend time with people. I hadn't had a chance to do that, getting reacquainted with people. And so, but God had other plan. And because I was familiar with Love Inc. and had been on the board when I worked at Central Community, I was familiar with the concept. And hearing Paul's heart and hearing the ministry of what His Helping Hands does, knowing and being familiar with it, I knew that it was something that the Lord wanted me to be a part of. So when I was praying to Him about what is it that He wanted to accomplish, because He obviously put me there, so He has something that He wants to do. And Paul used the word mobilize. And so I just looked up that definition, and the word mobilize is to prepare and equip the troops for service, is what he meant by that. And I thought, okay, so my role in what I believe at Love in Action is to help mobilize and work with the different bodies and organizations in town to mobilize us to reach a community that is very rarely gets touched, and that's the poor and very poor in our community that are in constant need of assistance and constant need of help. And I had a pastor's wife, actually last week I was in a meeting with one of our churches, and she says, what do you want to see accomplished by all this? And I said, I believe what God wants are transformed lives. I believe He wants people to know that He loves them and that He has a wonderful plan for their life. They would not normally go to a church. They would not normally feel like that they would have any, and they've been in a cycle, as I worked in shelters and worked over the last few years, third and fourth generations are in that poverty cycle. That is not God's plan. That is not God's best, and that is not what He desires for people. So our first and foremost goal with Love in Action, along with His helping hands, is to help people, to introduce them to who Jesus really is to them, that He loves them, and that He has a wonderful plan for their life. So when we get a phone call, that's the very first place that we start. We get the demographic information and those kinds of things to find out what the need is. But we really want to find out, are you ready for a change? Are you ready for something new? Because let me tell you, we've got someone who can give you a whole new start and a whole new way of doing things. So what we want to do is for people to know, again, that God has a wonderful plan for them. And how we're doing that, we are doing that in several different ways. And really my heart is just to leave it up to how it's comfortable for your congregation. There are some congregations that monthly support Love in Action. They have supported Love Inc. over the years, but support Love in Action. And they say, we're going to send everybody to you, we'll send you a monthly donation, and then, but don't call us, which that's totally all right, because if we're not set up to do that, if that's not the focus of the ministry, then, we're more than willing to do that. I have other congregations that say, you know what, we'll support you monthly, but we also want to be involved in those folks' lives. And so when someone comes in, we find out where they're at, and then we start looking for a congregation that's in their area. Excuse me, and we'll make contact with that local body. I've already done that this week, actually. There's a single mom who is struggling and trying to figure all this stuff out on her own and has a lot of mental health issues, and I've been able to get her plugged into a church this week. So really excited about that. The other opportunity is that if you have people that want to come in and volunteer, if you have people who like to answer phones, we've kind of divided out how we're doing it. We're just so that the whole burden of the taking of the calls, because some of the stories are pretty interesting stories and sometimes very horrific stories about how they got into a financial condition that they're in. And so, we know that there's some that are not interested in anything like that, and so, but we're more interested in seeing lives transformed. Amen. We're more interested in seeing them get to know Jesus as their Lord and Savior and to begin to find out that plan. And that's what I love about being under the umbrella of His helping hands, because that's the first and foremost about that entire ministry. We want to begin to make a difference more in this community. And as I have sensed, I've been a part of the Wichita Prayer Movement since in the last couple of years, sensing about how God is moving in our community. It is what it was when I first was with Love Inc. 30 years ago. It's totally different. And it's an amazing place to be right now, is this city. To see how God is moving on hearts, to see how God is as you're sharing, Pastor, about pressing in. More and more people are pressing into Him. And I believe that, I know that the fields are white for the harvest. And so we have the opportunity as just a piece of that harvest and a piece of way of getting into the homes and the lives of people to be able to minister to them. And so if your churches has resources that we can send people to, if your church would like to be a part and like to share and support this ministry, what we try to do is we do all of the research on these families, and we'll check out their stories, and unfortunately they're not all true, and or they're not all, and not everybody is really honest. And so, but one of the things we're doing is, and I guess I'm more of a confronter, and I've learned to be over the years, is that we're confronting those issues now. Because we don't want people staying in that bondage, and we don't want people staying in that lifestyle. And so, so we're confronting, and that's when we get to share the opportunity of the gospel. Hey, we have such a better way for you. And some are open, some are not, and that's okay. But at least we know that we're planting the seed.
Amen.
And so we trust God with the seed, I trust Him with that. And hopefully someone, and if we find out that they're in your community, again, I always ask for permission from that person, but I'm trying to get people plugged into a local body because they're not out there trying to do all this on their own. They're not out there trying, especially like with single moms. Like the one lady, I also, got her in contact with Fresh Hope. So there's different ministries that God has formed in this community that we can now use and utilize more to get people plugged in, because as I was sharing with Paul, I was on my way to work this morning, and I was just, sometimes when I pray, he'll show me, the havoc. He showed me the havoc that sometimes the enemy is creating in this community or creating in the world. And it was like, it almost was overwhelming at the moment that I just had that sense. But what I truly understand is that so is God's people. God's people are even raising up to, even though He's creating havoc, there's even more power being raised up to combat that and to touch people's lives for His glory. And and that's why I feel like this is a very unique season that this community is. And I believe His helping hands, and I believe that Love in Action and Fresh Hope and the other ministries that are represented in this, the Faith of Finance have had a couple great meetings with Jackie and Joe about, leading people to Christ, but also getting them into freedom, because that's what it's about. Jesus says, I came to set the captives free. And it was for freedom that Christ set us free. And financial issues for people is a great bondage. And it's probably the toughest. When I worked at Central Community, I did what was called Hearts and Hands. And when we were out there, I had a church member actually, they needed some financial help, and she didn't like the idea of me asking certain questions about the resources that their family had and how they were using their resources. And it became very clear and very quick that, she wasn't going to share that, and told me that it was none of my business. Got so angry to the point that they left our church, also wanted a refund on their tithe. And I'm going, that scared me for them. Got a refund. We didn't even know how you could do that, or how you write a check for that. I don't know,
I get that request after I preach.
Yeah. But requested a refund on their tithe because I had asked to get a picture of how they were spending their resources. And just because they were a member, and I'm sure you all get that too, just because they're a member, they were feeling like they had the right to ask for the help. And unfortunately, we never got to help them. And we never got to see the freedom come in their life, because they just moved on to another body of believers and but took the stuff that they had in their heart with them. And so so my heart and my goal and I believe my purpose there is to share with people, to open their eyes that God has such a better plan, and with their finances and resources. And His Helping Hands has a great relationship with the community. So landlords and utility companies are always willing to work with us and willing to help us in helping the families that we're serving. So I've only been in this about 5 weeks, so I'm just still kind of getting my feet wet in it. But very excited again about the opportunity of what God is going to do just through this little piece of the bigger picture. So. Questions. I want to open, if you have questions specific about how we handle anything and what we can do to help you, anything I can do to serve you and help you with this. Again, if you have members, some churches take care of their members and we never hear from them, and they just send us the outside folks. Some send their members too. And so it's really up to you how you want us to do it and how we want to do it. And I'm, more than willing to visit with you one-on-one too. That's the other thing I'm trying to do right now is get out to our churches who have supported us and maybe some that would be new to the Love in Action and His Helping Hands ministry and find out how we can best serve your congregation. So I saw him, so yes.
Yeah, I was just, help-wise, I know somewhere if your presentation hits home, you're about to be covered up, okay? My church went, oh, we can cover them up,
Yeah,
okay?
sure.
And so my question in all of that is, how do volunteers help? Can they help once a week? You know, what do they need
Sure.
to do? Because it's not, oh yeah, you gotta work a 40-hour week. It's,
Sure.
oh no, you can come one day a week,
Yeah.
you can come, you know,
Yeah.
twice a month, or
Yeah.
what would you?
Okay,
help us with
well,
there?
I've kind of revised the volunteer system a little bit so that, again, the whole burden of one person calling in isn't on just that one person to see it all the way through. The first person, that would be someone to answer and take the information on the phone. That would be just the demographic information to find out a little bit about the situation, not to offer any promises or not to do anything but just to get a picture of what's going on in that family. And then I also know of people who like to do the research side. They love to dig in and find out who, you know, if this is really a true story, do the follow-up and things like that. So there would be another volunteer position that someone could come in and just take the intake information and check it out. That's all that they would do. And bring it, right now the financial decisions would stay with me or Paul or both, depending on the situation. But we would then we would determine whether that's going to be something that we can help with, something that we can start calling other churches to say, hey, can you help us with this kind of need or not? We're also wanting to, the other side of this too, is that one of the things that Love Inc. used to do were the home projects, where people actually, a group went to home and maybe did a yard project or did a small a handyman project and things like that. We have people that have nobody. And as I've worked, I used to manage senior apartment complexes. And one of the things I saw is that there's some seniors and there's some folks out there who have nobody. And because kids move and kids leave or there's strained relationships, they have no one who is willing to touch their lives. And so if we have someone, an elderly person or a disabled person that's in their home and, you know, needs the yard mowed or needs, you know, a shed fixed or something like that, that we could call a church in their neighborhood. And so we're going to develop a project coordinator that will work with different organizations as those projects come in. We haven't pursued that a whole lot yet, but that would be our heart, is to be the hands-on for those that do not have a church home, to get involved in the community. And then the other piece of this too is that we have a prayer room at His Helping Hands, and we would like people to love to pray and intercede. If you've got someone for, you know, 30 minutes to an hour, whatever that would look like, but just not necessarily, not take them out of the building, not take them outside of our office, but take them to the prayer room and take them to the throne. And begin to pray for these people who are calling in. Begin to intercede on their behalf. And then we would have someone later on follow up with them, say, you know, after we've helped them in a month's time, say, hey, how are you doing now? You know, how did this thing get resolved? And are you feeling any better about everything? Are you seeing any changes? Because we're praying for you. And I totally know that God can move again, He will transform lives as we intercede for people, just on a smaller scale like that. So those are kind of the basic volunteer areas. And we'll work with Paul to even have some equipment and things like rakes and, you know, shovels and things like that if people need some home projects done. But we would like to be able to have some churches who say, yes, you know, we'll coordinate a project with you and we'll be willing to go. I've got, you know, a gentleman right now, a pastor, who is going to go and she's a single mom. She's a retired foster care worker and has a special needs daughter now, special adopted one. And they're going to go within the next few weeks and help do some projects at her home. So we've kind of started off, but we would like to be able to do more of that as well. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
Oftentimes you get calls from people that are in dire straits right this minute. How long does it take you to vet them, per se? I mean, like someone whose electricity is turned off,
Mhm.
or their gas is turned off. They have children in the home.
Sure.
This type of thing. How long does it take you to vet them?
Right now, it takes a little longer just because I'm the only one doing it. But if we can get some help in there to do some of that stuff, we try to turn it around within a day or so, so that they're not sitting there without that. The issue then is once we find out it's a legitimate need, will be then finding the resources to do that. Because we're not the one that has the resources unless we're getting the monthly type of support. And again, if there's congregations that want to do that and say, hey, we'll just trust you that these are the folks that need the need, then we can do that. But it will take time in getting a hold of they have a committee or they have a group of people that make those kinds of decisions. So we tell people it's not going to happen overnight. It may take a couple days to kind of get through that process. Yeah. Any other questions?
So
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
If a church had, say, the ability to help within themselves,
Uh-huh.
would you help them, would you train them to how to vet people better then?
We can.
Okay.
Yeah, we sure could. Absolutely. Yeah. More than happy to help, yes.
In answer to your question over here, one thing I think that we've all probably learned in our ministry work is that sometimes if we help too quickly in something, we may be getting in the way of what God's trying to do in that person's life. And so we obviously want to be good stewards with the resources we have. So we're committed to do a good vetting job so that we are, here again, being good stewards with the resources that are given to us. So we're probably not going to be an emergency service or emergency fix all the time. Now, there might be some times, just due to the circumstances, we might be able to do that. But our purpose would be to really, make sure that there's a need there and then help appropriately.
Yeah. I have one church that all he wants to do is gas for people, like for their car. So that's going to be their focus. So if there's like a certain focus that your body likes to just concentrate on, that helps us then if we have that specific need as well. But yeah, usually some are good planners. It's like I've lady her rent's due in a few days, and so she knows that it's not going to be there. So she called in, and it's giving us the time that we need so that she's not going to have all those late fees, and gives us time to work with the landlord and those kinds of things. And then again, to follow up with her story. So yeah. Yes, sir.
How do you handle the work projects? We've got a men's group, large men's group.
Okay.
And there are several, I can probably count 4 contractors, handyman type guys have their own businesses that can coordinate stuff like that.
Sure.
How is the funding taking place? Like if you say, we've got a roof that needs to be fixed or a row of siding that needs to be replaced, do you call, my understanding of Love Inc. was you would call a church and say, we have a need, and then, the next church on the list. If we have a bunch of men that are committed to doing something like this once every 2 months or whatever, how is that funded? Is that through the church that is doing the project, or is that coming from Love in Action?
It's probably going to be on a case-by-case basis, I would think. Yeah, I would think we would have to look at each project, if it's just like cleanup and those kinds of things, whatever, if there's not a lot of investment needed or finances needed. If it's a larger project, then I'd have to work with Paul and see how we would coordinate that, if it's going to come through Love in Action or if it's going to be through a group of churches. It could be that we have to call several churches and say, hey, can you donate a couple $100 towards this? So yeah, I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Yeah. And again, that we're still working on what that's going to look like, but we want, even the guy with the gas, he said, I want to see their face. And he said, I want to know where they are with Christ before I ever put a gallon of gas in their car. And so, that's the goal. It's that face-to-face, that touching ministry that's not, that gets hands-on with people in our community. I used to work for Mennonite Housing several years ago, and I did home repair. I worked in the home repair department, and I would go out and assess homes that needed repairs. We have homes in our community that are in worse shape than they are in third world countries. And I never thought I would see dirt floors in my city. And there are houses there, and it was like what we could offer was it wasn't even a Band-Aid. It was just, wipe off the wound type thing. But the opportunity to touch some areas of Wichita that are totally untouched, I guess, it's mind-boggling that because that's part of what Jesus came was for the poor. He's blessed are the poor in heart, for they shall see the kingdom of God, or seek the kingdom. And it's like that's God's desire too, is for the poor, for that to be broken off of their lives, and for them to be restored into the fullness. He has a plan for everyone's life, and that's what our desire is, to see that plan fulfilled. So.
Anybody else?
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.